It was a Tuesday morning, early, the kind of morning where the shop smells like cold concrete and old coffee, when a white sedan pulled into my bay with an idle that sounded like it was thinking about dying. Not misfiring, not stalling, just rough. A low, uneven shudder that you could feel in the steering wheel and hear as a faint wobble in the exhaust note. The driver stepped out, looked at me, and said the words I have heard more times than I can count. It just started doing this. I didn't change anything. I didn't touch anything. It just started. He had already been to a quick lube shop. They told him it was probably his spark plugs. He replaced them. The idle was still rough. Then a parts store employee suggested a fuel injector cleaner. He used it. Still rough. Then a friend told him it might be a vacuum leak. He sprayed carb cleaner around every hose he could find, found nothing, and arrived at my shop convinced the engine was failing. He had spent around $200 already, and the idle had not changed by a single revolution. I did not touch the engine. I plugged in a scanner, watched two numbers climb on the screen, disconnected the battery, waited 12 minutes, reconnected it, and started the car. The idle smoothed out before it even fully warmed up. That driver stared at me like I had performed surgery without opening the patient. He asked me what I did. I told him I reset the car's memory. He asked me what that meant. And that conversation is exactly why I made this video. A rough idle is one of the most misunderstood symptoms in the modern automotive world. It sounds like a mechanical problem. It feels like something is physically wrong. And that instinct pushes drivers directly toward parts, toward repairs, toward invoices that should never exist. The reality is that in modern vehicles, a rough idle is more often a data problem than a mechanical failure. Data problems do not need parts. They need a reset. Here is what most people are never told. Your engine does not simply run. It learns. Every drive you take, the engine control unit, ECU, is quietly storing data. It is tracking how much air is entering the intake. It is monitoring what the oxygen sensors report from the exhaust. It is watching coolant temperature, throttle position, battery voltage, and dozens of other inputs. And based on all of that, it is constantly adjusting how much fuel to inject, when to fire each cylinder, and how to hold idle speed stable. That adaptive process is called fuel trim, and it is happening right now in your car. When everything goes well, fuel trims stay balanced, combustion stays clean, and the idle is smooth. But when one input goes wrong, even briefly, even temporarily, the ECU does not question it. It trusts it. It adapts around it. It stores that adaptation into memory. And then it keeps using that memory long after the bad condition has passed. This is the moment rough idle is born. Not from a broken part, but from the ECU believing something that is no longer true. Let me make that concrete. Imagine you drive one morning when it is unusually cold and humid. The mass airflow sensor, which measures the air entering your engine, reports a slightly elevated reading because dense, cold air carries more oxygen. The ECU compensates by adding fuel. The idle holds steady. You drive normally, you park. The ECU stores that adjustment in its short-term memory. If this happens repeatedly over the following days and weeks, that adjustment migrates from short-term memory into long-term fuel trim. Now, it is locked in. The car treats that overfueling as normal. And on a warm, dry afternoon, when the conditions are completely different, the ECU is still compensating for a cold, humid morning that no longer exists. The idle gets rich, it gets uneven, it gets rough. You did not break anything. You did not skip any maintenance. The car simply learned the wrong thing, and it is still following that lesson. There is another version of this I see constantly in my shop. It is caused by something almost every driver has experienced: a battery replacement. The moment you disconnect the old battery and connect the new one, every single adaptation the engine control unit had ever stored is wiped, gone, clean slate. This is not always a problem, but it often becomes one for a specific reason. When a battery weakens over months or years before it finally dies, the engine control unit quietly compensated for the low voltage the entire time. It adapted fuel trim to account for a weak charging system. It adjusted idle speed to compensate for the parasitic drain of a battery working too hard. Those adaptations became baseline, and the moment you install a fresh battery with full voltage, the engine control unit suddenly has too much power for the assumptions it was making. The idle can surge and then drop. It can hunt, meaning it climbs and falls rhythmically. It can simply run rough until the system figures out what normal looks like again, and it can relearn. Most drivers do not connect the battery replacement to the rough idle. The shop that installed the battery usually does not bring it up, so the driver chases the symptom with parts, while the actual cause, a system that needs to relearn, sits waiting for a reset that nobody performs. The third version is the one I find most expensive for drivers who do not know what they are dealing with. It is called the dirty throttle body contribution, and it works like this. Over time, carbon and oil vapor accumulate on the walls of the throttle body and on the back of the throttle plate. This is completely normal, but at some point that buildup becomes significant enough to restrict airflow at idle. The engine control unit notices less air and adjusts fuel accordingly. The idle holds. That adaptation is saved. Then someone cleans the throttle body, which is the right maintenance move, and suddenly the restriction is gone. Air flows freely again, but the engine control unit is still compensating for the old restriction. Now the mixture is too lean or too rich depending on how the system responds, and the idle becomes rough or unstable. The cleaning made things worse, not because cleaning was wrong, but because nobody reset the system after cleaning. The adaptation that was correct with a dirty throttle body is completely wrong with a clean one. I see this pattern constantly. Maintenance is performed without the reset that should always follow. Drivers assume the cleaning did nothing or caused a new problem, when in reality, the fix is already done. The system just needs to be told to start over. So, what does the reset actually do? When you remove power from the vehicle correctly and hold the discharge long enough to drain residual voltage from the system capacitors, the ECU loses its stored adaptive memory. Fuel trims go to zero, idle relearn tables clear. The throttle body position baseline resets. When the car restarts, it runs on factory defaults, and it begins observing real-world conditions to build new, accurate adaptations from scratch. This process is called a drive cycle relearn, and it is the part most drivers rush through and ruin. Here is the exact procedure I use in my shop. First, make sure the engine is either completely cold or fully warmed up. Do not do this with a partially warm engine. Turn the ignition off completely. Locate the negative terminal on the battery. Loosen the clamp and remove the cable. Do not let the cable touch the battery post. Now the step most internet guides skip entirely. Hold the brake pedal down for 30 to 45 seconds. This discharges the capacitors in the control modules and forces a true memory clear. Without this step, some modules can retain voltage long enough to hold on to their stored data. After pressing the brake, wait 10 full minutes. Do not cheat this. Module capacitors take time to fully drain. After 10 minutes, reconnect the negative cable and tighten the clamp securely. Now, start the engine. Do not rev it. Do not touch the gas pedal. Let it idle completely untouched for 2 full minutes. This allows the engine control unit to establish a baseline idle table. After 2 minutes, turn on the air conditioning, the headlights, and the rear defroster if your car has one. These electrical loads teach the engine control unit what normal accessory draw looks like at idle. Let it run for another 2 minutes, then drive. How you drive for the next 20 to 30 miles matters enormously. Start with gentle acceleration, normal stops, steady cruising between 30 and 50 miles per hour. Include a few minutes at highway speed if possible. Avoid hard acceleration, towing, or any unusual driving patterns. You are not just driving, you are teaching the ECU what your normal operating conditions look like. You are giving it clean data to build new, accurate adaptations from. If you drive aggressively immediately after a reset, the ECU learns aggressive patterns, and those patterns become the new baseline. Most drivers who say a reset did not work made one of 3 mistakes. They did not hold the brake long enough to drain the capacitors. They did not wait long enough before reconnecting, or they drove hard immediately after restart and gave the ECU garbage data to learn from. The reset itself is simple. The relearn is what takes discipline. Now here is the honest part. A reset will not fix every rough idle. I said that earlier, and I mean it. There are genuine mechanical causes of a rough idle that data correction cannot address. Examples include a misfiring ignition coil, a leaking fuel injector, a cracked vacuum hose, or a compression problem in one cylinder. These problems will return after a reset. When they return, they reveal themselves clearly because the system is no longer masking them with layers of adaptive compensation. This is actually one of the most useful things a reset can do beyond fixing data problems. It clarifies the diagnosis. When you reset and the rough idle disappears, you know with certainty that the cause was adaptive memory. No parts needed. If you reset and the rough idle returns within a day or two, you know something real is happening. You have not wasted the reset. You have confirmed the problem is mechanical, and now you can chase it with confidence instead of guessing. There is also a targeted reset approach worth knowing for specific situations. If you just replaced a coolant temperature sensor, you do not need a full battery disconnect. Clearing the fault code with a scan tool and performing a coolant relearn idle is usually sufficient. If you cleaned the throttle body on a drive-by-wire vehicle, a throttle position reset through a scan tool is more precise than a full power cycle. If you replaced an oxygen sensor, the system needs to complete a full drive cycle, including a cold start, a warm idle, and steady cruising above 40 miles per hour before the fuel trims stabilize. These targeted approaches work better in some cases because they reset only the relevant memory without disturbing systems that were already running correctly. I want to talk about one more cause that almost nobody mentions when discussing rough idle because it is incredibly common and almost universally misdiagnosed. It is called idle air control valve contamination on older vehicles or throttle body relearn failure on newer drive-by-wire systems. Here is what happens. On drive-by-wire cars, there is no physical cable connecting the accelerator pedal to the throttle plate. Instead, a motor moves the throttle plate based on signals from the ECU. That motor has a position it calls 0, its baseline, its starting point. When the battery is disconnected or replaced, that 0 point is lost. When the car restarts, the throttle plate does not know where closed is. It estimates, and if that estimate is even slightly off, the idle speed the ECU tries to control for airflow is wrong. The result is a rough, unstable, or high idle that feels like a major problem. The fix is something called a throttle body relearn, or a closed throttle position reset. On many vehicles, this happens automatically during the relearn drive cycle I described. On others, it requires a specific procedure. For Toyota and Lexus vehicles, turning the ignition to the on position without starting for 3 seconds, then flooring the accelerator and releasing it 3 times, then turning the ignition off and waiting 3 minutes forces the throttle position reset. Honda vehicles have a similar procedure using ignition cycles and specific idle time. Many European vehicles require a scan tool to perform this reset properly. If your rough idle appeared after a battery replacement and the battery disconnect reset did not fully cure it, this throttle position relearn is likely the missing step. The broader truth here is that modern engines are extraordinary machines precisely because of how much they adapt. They compensate for altitude, they adjust for fuel quality, they account for engine wear over time. They keep cars running smoothly under conditions that would have destroyed older, simpler systems. But that same adaptability is a double-edged tool. When the learning goes wrong, the correction goes wrong. When bad data becomes baseline, bad behavior becomes normal. And the system does not panic. It just keeps doing what it learned to do, confidently and persistently, until someone forces it to start over. That moment, the restart, the relearn, the return to clean, accurate data, is not a hack. It is not a trick. It is a legitimate diagnostic and corrective procedure that engineers built into these systems on purpose. They expected the memory to need clearing. They designed the procedure into the architecture. They just never included it in the owner's manual. Which means every time a driver pays hundreds of dollars to replace parts, chasing a rough idle that a 12-minute battery reset would have resolved, it is not because the car was broken. It is because the information gap between how modern vehicles actually work and what drivers are told was never closed. You now have what it takes to close that gap. Before you replace a sensor, before you authorize an idle cleaning service, before you buy a set of spark plugs based on a rough idle that appeared after a battery swap or a throttle body cleaning, disconnect the battery, drain the capacitors, wait, reconnect, and let the car relearn correctly. If the rough idle disappears, you just saved yourself real money. If it comes back, you now have the clarity to pursue the real cause. Either way, you win. Either way, you are making decisions based on information instead of fear. If this changed how you think about rough idle and what modern cars actually need, hit like, so this reaches drivers who are spending money right now that they should never have to spend. Subscribe for more breakdowns that put real knowledge in your hands instead of cash in someone else's pocket. If you have ever reset your car and watched a rough idle disappear overnight, drop that story in the comments. Every story like that is proof that the most expensive car repair is always the one that should never have happened at all.